So the presence here is broadly crowd up. There's a record button on there, so can you get it? My name is Roy. I happen to be the chairman of the Friends of the Blaauwberg Conservation Area for this year, and this is one of our first, I think this year, outings that we've organised. We have them regularly. We try to have meetings every month. Next month is on the 26th or 27th, which I will be presenting, and that's the recovery of the Blaauwberg Hill. And the four-wheel drive fraternity and those who were involved with the wrecking of it will be invited to see the recovery. And then we're going to have an astronomy presentation that's going to be on the beach. Thereafter, we've got a lot of ideas. I would like to have an archaeologist come and talk about the pre-settler era, the Khoi or the San, the beach dwellers, who many middens have been found here. So we'll organise that. But if you've got any ideas, please help us. And I want to thank Ronnie. Where's Ronnie? Ronnie Glass and the Cape Natural History Club for requesting this meeting. We had, and we always have a plan to put the Battle of Blaauwberg on our program. And in fact, I put the minutes of a meeting here, second meeting of the Battle of Blaauwberg Steering Committee. This was in 2004. This was for the bicentennial 2006. And I see here, it said, we would like to have an annual meeting. They should have an annual meeting. Nobody seems to have had an annual meeting. We certainly haven't been involved. And perhaps next year, on the anniversary, which is in January, we should have a special meeting by then. I have some apologies. Dan Slay, who is a well-known historian, he was coming until Thursday, and then he remembered what that little note was on the calendar. It was his birthday today. And his daughter came to remind him on Thursday. So he's on Table Mountain now. So we can think of him and he can think of us. There's also a naval historian, or you know about naval historian. Who's coming?
Mac Visit.
Mac Visit, yes, he also couldn't make it. And Ignatius Freer from the castle, also he couldn't make it. But we do have an author of this book, which is very entertaining reading. Mark Anderson is here, and he's got some copies, I hope. So when we get to the hill, there's a number of people. I've taken the cover off because he's looking at me very concerned. There's the cover. Beautiful cover. Beautiful. And he's got a painting which we'll put up just now. I'm not going to take too much time before I introduce Tony. But what we have to do is, after the refreshments, we have to look at the logistics. There's a limited space on the top of the hill to park. There's plenty of parking at the back. But the logistics is that we have to drive all the way around to Morningstar to get into the Blaauwberg Hill area. We don't have access off the R27 yet. We hope to, but we have to negotiate with our neighbours. Is Joanne Jackson here? Okay, because Joanne is from the city and she was planning to be with us. And anybody who has got archive material, maps, stories, the city of Cape Town is setting up an archive centre. I believe it's quite a big area in the city, in the building. And we would like to collect this information. There's a lot of people who've got information, artifacts, and if we don't do it now, we may not be able to show it when we have permanent facilities in the area. There's a gentleman from the Pappendorf, is he here? Society? No? He phoned me, said he was coming. Yeah, got it right. So after the presentation, I'm going to put this thing up, and then if you could just tell us who's going to go in the convoy, who wants to take their cars to the hill. And then we've got 4x4s that are going to take you up to the top of the hill. Those who want to walk, please do. It's a very pleasant walk up the hiking trail that the conservation team have organised. So I'm just going to put two sides here so we know how many cars are going to be left here. And obviously you need to tell us when you want to get back. because obviously if you leave your car here and everyone leaves, you're going to end up on the hill. And then while we're on the hill, I'm going to put this up. There's a lot of controversy, it seems, about whether it's Blaauwberg or Blaauwberg. So what you would like to do is just have a little survey, which spelling you feel is more appropriate for the reserve that is being proclaimed. Good. So, now, Tony Gordon, if I could, Major Tony Gordon, he is well known to us. He's been very faithful and supportive of our group here since the steering committee, the inception in 2002. I've got 2 pages of background on him, but I'm not going to tell you about it.
How did you get that?
See, I keep my records.
From the special branch.
It didn't date it, maybe, so it could be 2002. But we've really enjoyed Tony's visits, and my proposal is that we actually give him a special presentation, honorary life membership of the Friends of Blaauwberg Conservation Area. And Ronnie will speak about, we're going to have a little special collection for additional funds to make his presentation gift very special. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Tony because I'm sure you want to hear from him, not me. And when we're on the hill, there's plenty of time. Please, we're going to, you've got plenty of time to wander around and to talk to the people who know more about the battle than myself. So Tony, can I hand over to you?
Well, thank you very much. There's a chair there. Yes, that's it. May I start off by saying that I just mentioned the fact that I was lumbered that Dan Slay was going to be talking today. Now, he is the expert. You know, he's written wonderful books, and he's had a I don't know whether it's a video or something made a long time ago, a very good one about the battle. But Dan couldn't come. And then Mac Bissett, Commander Mac Bissett, who some of you may know, who was an ex-naval historian with a terrific knowledge of all these aspects, he couldn't come either. So who's lumbered? So one thing I must say to start with that I'm not so young these days, and I do find when I'm preparing for these things, my memory is not so good. So if we have gaps, I might ask you to fill in the gaps. My managing director is here, so she can get that. But basically, what I would like to say, thank you to the Blaauwberg Conservation Area. It's wonderful work that's been done over a long period, and not with frustrations and all this sort of thing, and to the City Council, who back them sometimes. Things are happening, and every time one goes up the hill, you see improvements, and here you can see improvements. It really is absolutely wonderful, because we can lose all this, some of these aspects very quickly. Now I must mention how I'm involved. I am a South African, although I was 24 years in the British Army. I was the 4th generation in the British Army. And my great uncle took part in this battle in the 93rd Highlanders. In fact, he's pictured here, that's him here. He was a sergeant, and the Highland regiments, and particularly with most of the infantry regiments, always formed up by number. 71st, HLI, Seaforths, and then now our Guard and Southern Highlanders. And he was the ordnance sergeant for that day. So that's him there. Thank you very much for putting him in the picture. And so I've got this sort of background. He, as a matter of interest, went on to be promoted to become an officer, ensign, and he went to Grahamstown with Colonel Graham. Now, Major Graham was his company commander at the battle here. And now you probably know that Colonel Graham himself was very well known now in South African history. And this, he got a couple of chaps, sergeants from the 93rd to go to Grahamstown for working with him. And we've got sketches and all sorts of things in the family of him. So the other aspect is that, I don't know if you probably know, that the 93rd started the Presbyterian Church here. Believe it or not, some Scottish soldiers nochal paid money for their church. And the padre said they used to send money back to Scotland. Now, this particular battalion came from the far northeast of Scotland, up in Sutherland. That's why they're called Sutherland now. And very much of a family business. And they were very good. And that regiment was in Cape Town for 14 years after the battle. And they had a wonderful reputation, unlike some. However, that's the sort of background, that's how I got involved. Also from a military history point of view, when I returned to Cape Town in 70, with a managing director and 2 sons. It was, one's been heavily involved in British war graves and everything, and it all links up. And then I was on the Castle Museum board and that sort of. However, let's get on to the battle. Cape Town, or the Cape, I should say, the Western Cape, was the desire of 4 nations. 4 nations were after this. Who was it who discovered it? Portuguese. Portuguese discovered it. Then the others were Portuguese, French, Dutch, of course, they owned it, well, mostly, and then the British. The Portuguese dropped out fairly quickly. Now why? There's one particular incident which caused them to drop out. A ship came around, including the senior Portuguese official from the Far East, and they stopped in Blaauwberg to get food and water and that sort of thing. And they weren't very friendly to the Khoi at the time. And so the Khoi attacked them in a big way. And the Portuguese had, I think it was 35 people killed, including the senior Portuguese staff person. And after that, the Portuguese said, no way. And they never came to the Cape, so they went up to Mozambique or to Angola, each far side. And thank God it left only 3 nations. Now, during Napoleonic Wars, Britain was against France and Spain, and Holland had been taken by the French. And it became now this is where my memory goes, the Batavian Republic. And so to all intents and purposes, the Dutch were with the French. And the British knew that the British interests in the Far East were terrific. And they've been competing against the French for a hell of a long time, and the Dutch. The Dutch were mainly in the Indonesian side, what now Indonesian side, but the French were all over the Far East. And so the time came, even during the Napoleonic Wars in 1805, Britain said, well, we've got to stop the French getting to the Cape. Because, you see, Britain had attacked the Cape in 1797, 1795. 1795 to 1803. And then they handed it back to the then Batavian Republic, as Holland called itself. Basically, they'd been taken over by the French. Now, when the British arrived here, and they arrived, where did they come into? Well, Simonstown, actually, yeah. We went to the Battle of Edgeton. Why did they go to Muizenberg and not here? one word that explains the whole thing.
Wind.
Wind. We all know the wind is either from the southeast or from the northwest. But sailing ships, of course, are completely at the beck and call of the wind. And so the British, I think in 1795, went into Simonstown, very badly equipped, very underfunded, and they were dependent on the Dutch for the first few months, and there were a lot of arguing. But they had a letter from the Prince of Orange, who had been King of Holland, but when the French took over, he got to England. And he wrote this letter to the Dutch authorities here, which incidentally included a family namesake, Colonel Gordon, saying, let the British take over the place temporarily. Because they were there, they knew the British were there, the British commander went up with them. But there was a big divide internally in the Cape as to whether they should go with the Dutch, the Batavian Republic or the French. There was a lot of political upheaval at the time. So the French, the British eventually discovered that the Dutch here were not going to have the thing, didn't want to. They realized they were going to have to fight. Now this time, they'd got a few reinforcements coming from St. Helena all over the place, but they were terribly bad, terribly short. And they had masses of people ill. The British ill, all looked after by the Dutch hospital, which is now the big, there's a big naval storerooms and things like behind the old harbour there. Those are all from that period. And eventually, the British said, no, we're going to have to attack. So they came up to the very under-equipped and everything. But what they did have is they had 3 big warships. Now these big ships had hell of a lot of guns and big guns. And they were going to back up because they knew the army would have to go up the road. You know how narrow that road is. And the Dutch held at Newton Place. There's a little place, you can see it's all marked out now. Ideal defensive position. And the Dutch were holding up the side of the hill, and they also put in a couple of extra guns on the coast nearby, but not normally there. So the British came up, but what they did was that they, beforehand, they did soundings out at sea, taking depths, so they knew exactly how close in the big warships could come, because they were going to do the support. Like we normally have our artillery these days. They had the naval artillery, which is even better when somebody else does the work. And so that when they came, and they didn't realize what was going on, but the 3 ships came in and bombarded the backside off the Dutch positions there. And the Dutch never forgot that. And when it came to here, they remembered that, and they didn't want to get the same thing again. It was the same situation with British warships out at sea. So after a few years, it became obvious that Britain was going to hand back the Cape to the Dutch. And whilst that was going on, my regiment was part of the regiment now. 71st became the Highland Infantry. They came from India. They'd been there 18 years in India. And they came around the Cape here. And whilst they were here, the commanding officer, Colonel Blaauwberg, dropped off and became a brigadier on the staff here. And he was in the Cape for 3 years. So he knew that everybody knew that if we handed it back, we would have to take it properly sometime. And so he and his chums, they made all the plans, and they knew exactly what we had to go for. And it's quite easy. I'm not going to go into great detail, but the which is that battalion took 10 months to get from India to Scotland. 10 months. And I don't know how many ships. They sat in St. Helena for 3 months because there were danger of French warships waiting for a convoy, and eventually they sailed without a convoy. But you see, at that time, the Spanish were at it, and Trafalgar hadn't taken place. Trafalgar took place whilst this convoy was coming out here. They didn't know it, of course. So the British had a terrific interest, and they'd been here quite recently. They put up a lot of these block houses things all around Cape Town and all over the place. Bastards them put up, they went up the hill above Rhodes Memorial. Those are all 1803. But now those had big guns, 18-pounders. An 18-pounder shot is a thing of that size, but not the sort of thing to stop in midair. So the British knew about it. I might say Colonel Baird was quite a character. He had, as a lieutenant, he'd been captured by Tipu Sar in India, him and another officer of the regiment. And they were both wounded, and he captured them. He tied them up in a cellar. And obviously, Baird's mother didn't have a very big opinion or knew what he was like. Because when she wrote, she said she was sorry for the other officer. And this is, our regimental story. So he was quite a character. But he had also, after that, when the British pulled out from here in 1803, he and Admiral, what the hell is his name? Popper had together done combined operations in a number of different places, East Africa, the Suez Canal, various places. They'd worked together because combined operations and landings are very difficult, particularly when you depend on the wind and where the hell you can go. So those two had worked together very well. So it was ideal that they be put together. Now, it brings me to the thing, how could Britain produce a fleet of 65, 63 ships in the middle of the Napoleonic Wars? And Nappy was sitting just the other side of the channel, ready to invade Britain. And yet they could send all this, including nine big warships, out here for the Cape. It indicates the importance of the Cape. And this comes up time and again. Same thing, Second World War. This is why Robben Island was made the fortress that it was. And the Cape was so well defended. I've got various things, if anybody's interested in pictures of Robben Island and that sort of thing. Some of you may have come across General Moody, General Graham Moody.
He's still alive.
He's still alive.
He'll be 100 this year.
Yeah, that's right. He's 99 now. He'll be 100 fairly soon. He was chief instructor of the coast artillery on the island. He's a relative of my mother's side, so we knew him very well. Now at that time, most of the war, or the beginning of the war, my father was at the castle on the staff, and in his diary, Graham Moody was here on Robben Island doing a fantastic job, but his two brothers lived up north. Everybody wanted to get up north, so Graham was wanting to get up north. He had his red stripes on, and he used to go to my father at the castle, because my father was the lieutenant governor, Graham was the major, appealing to be allowed to go up north. And in my father's diary, he puts, visit from GDM. Same question, same answer. Graham, I mean, you would take it from a sort of family member. The Cape was important. And this place was incredibly well defended. And that, particularly after radar came, you can see the radar was up there. This is what the great thing about this hill is. It's got everything on it. It's got ancient stuff, it's got more modern stuff as well. And it really is a fantastic collection. So, the British were after the Cape. That's why they came back in 1806, in a big way. The first time they came, they were disorganized, they had no money, they weren't supported. But this time, in 1806, they came, they were in a big way. And the Dutch knew, they guessed they were coming. But what, any of you know the first warning they got, the Dutch got?
Isn't it the French vessel?
Yes, Christmas Day. Now I'm going to go on to the leaflet. Now, have you all seen this leaflet?
Yes.
What do you want to? Can we distribute them? I've got 10 copies, but I'm going to go stick to it because it's all in here. Well, a couple of little errors, but it's all in here. in September, I think it was. The 25th of December, Christmas time, the Dutch were warned by, there was a French ship that had been chased by a British frigate. Now, when this fleet was coming, they wanted nobody to see it. So they had frigates way out all around it, chasing or capturing ships that were having a looky-looky. And this French ship saw this, the French ship was chased around here, and the French ship went aground down in what is now Cape Point Nature Reserve. But they were able to tell the Jansons, the Lieutenant General Jansons, that the British were coming. And that was the first warning they had, Christmas Day. After being chased by an English warship, a French privateer ran aground near Cape Point. I can't remember the name, but it's certainly on the list. The captain brought news of the Cape, of strong British fleet en route to the Cape. And so Jansen, on the 1st of January, a proclamation was issued for a general call-out for able-bodied men. New Year's Day, what chances? Things don't change much. Not only that, there was a lot of, the farmers were picking, and they were doing a lot of things besides the holiday. But this is one of the first times that the cannon changed. The cannons on the top of the hills that had been used genuinely. And it did work. But I might say, how many of you, do any of you belong to the Cannon Association of South Africa? Yes, well, I do, and it's a wonderful thing. And the, what's his name? Jerry de Vries, Commander, ex-South African Navy, he's in charge, and he's a wonderful chap. And if ever you find a cannon, and a cannon is not the Afrikaans kanon. It's a cannon in English is the thing that you load from the front. A kanon in Afrikaans unfortunately means a gun and a cannon. And that's, even the papers get it wrong. But there are thousands of cannon around the coast and here. And you'll find Jerry, I mean, he's told us that he gets people from all over the world coming. Why? Because of all the international ships that were sunk here. And there's an enormous number of cannons lying there to be had. And that's why when you go around the castle, all those cannons you see sticking in the ground, they're all registered. Jerry's got them all on his list. I didn't bring my big book with me, but it's a very thick book now. And the interesting thing is that nowadays you cannot sell a cannon or pass it off for scrap. A few years ago, they were all scrap, huge, a lot of scrap or a cannon. Nowadays, the value is such that you can't do it because then you can sell them for more. Almost every second farmer wants to have a cannon pop on his farm these days. And Jerry goes on, they fire these guns. You know, Hart Bay at the castle as well, they fire them every opportunity. And there's all sorts of legal things. And Jerry has his red box from the police and all this sort of thing. But cannon of South Africa is a very big historical aspect. However, I'll just go on to that. But Jansen's called them up without a lot of success. And he had a terrible of forces. We'll come to that just now. 4th of January, the British fleet was sighted. They sighted the top of the mountain about the same time, and the 4th of January. You know, there's still not much happening in the 4th of January. 63 British ships under Commodore Popham, carrying some 7,000 troops, commanded by Major General Sir David Beard, dropped anchor between Robben Island and here, Blaauwberg here, just outside, masses of ships. What wind was blowing at that time? Southeaster. Well, you see, the last time they came, there was the northwester was blowing, so it was safer in fact, the Dutch wouldn't allow ships in during the northwester period. They had to go to southeaster. But when they came in, there was still a wind, and you know, this can play up hell. Nice and calm today, but it wasn't always like that. Baird knew what to expect at the Cape, as he had served as a brigadier general during the first British occupation. He planned to land in Table Bay, but this was not possible as gale force winds were blowing. He wanted to get quite closer to town. Janssens had begun preparations for the defence of Cape Town. He was able to rally about 2,000 men. Now, I'm not going to go through the list. If you have these sheets out, there's a whole list of Batavian Marines, Wardeck Battalion, French sailors and Marines from 2 French ships, the Hottentot regiments, the Khoisan, very interesting, the oldest regiment in South Africa. And unfortunately, they don't exist anymore for political reasons. Javanese artillery, the Wardeckers, and some slaves from Angola and Mozambique. But it was really a mixture that he had. And where did he go? Where did Janssens go to? They had a camp at Reed Flay. Why Reed Flay? There's water there. And the spring is still there next to the Sandcom, just next to the Sandcom building. There's a plaque there, and there is the spring still there. Water was critical. Why did all the original Dutch and British, everybody come to Cape Town? But for water. It wasn't a good anchorage. There's much better anchorage up the coast of Saldanha, but there's no water up there. But Cape Town had water all year round. And that's why they came here. Now, in fact, I think, can we issue those sheets, these ones you've got? I'll tell you why, because there are some errors in it, and I'd like to point them out as we come to them.
They have been destroyed.
They have been, right. I'm on the bottom of that first page, the 5th of January. Janssens moved his troops northward to the VOC outpost of Reed Flay. 2 of the British warships and some transport ships sailed to Saldanha Bay to occupy the port. Now, that's not complete. A small party tried to get in at Big Bay. They tried to land at Big Bay. Now, Baird had seen Big Bay. It was slightly sheltered. Why do you think all the big surfers go there now? Lovely waves. But so this is why they tried to get in there, and a bit of extra wind, they couldn't get in there. So that was on the 5th. And I've changed the wording here. After they got to Reed Flay, 2 of the British warships and some transport ships sailed to Saldanha Bay. After failing to land at Big Bay, and then they sailed with the dragoons, that's the cavalry, with very few horses, and the 38th Regiment. They went straight up, right up to Saldanha. But that was a very small force. And the other word is, the last word of that page, they said to occupy the port. There was no port there for another 100 years. So these things get fitting. The next day, British troops landed at Losbert's Bay. Now we can have a look at this.
Tony, can I just ask you, you've said that he planned to land in Table Bay. I always thought Table Bay was the one place to avoid. No, prior to that, Table Bay.
Right,
because of the fortifications.
That's right. Well, he
doesn't
knew
make
that.
sense to me.
And they knew the fortifications, because they'd been there, and some of them were even put up whilst they were there. But when they said Table Bay it was much closer in, then they eventually, right up near the mouth of the Salt River, I think that's what this going was after. And in fact, they even sent 2 ships, I think, and a warship round to Camps Bay. Because remember, the Dutch had there were 2 little batteries at Camps Bay, but they're still there, and there was another one up on the hill as well. And they went in it as a threat, just so that Janssens would take people there to take people off the main threat coming in. But no, I think they did into them. They knew bloody well where they couldn't get into, and you couldn't get in underneath all those guns. And the only thing was that when you look at the guns they had and the number of people they had to man them, they just didn't match up. But even so, they could get, you have heavy losses. They wanted to land unopposed.
I tell you, I thought their forts went around the corner, more towards Barton Island, which is where I think you're suggesting they were going to land.
Well, Barton Island didn't have any kind of guns there.
With an
They,
open.
Salt River Mouth, there was a couple near Salt River Mouth, and what's the name of the big old fort? In where the tramways place is the bottom of.
Surrey Street.
So at the bottom of Searle Street, there was this big fort.
Imhoff.
Fort Imhoff Battery. No, Imhoff is at the castle. But there was a big one. Sorry, but that was a very big thing, and that in fact was the military cemetery and the military hospital as well. And you'll find a lot of military graves have been moved from there. Sorry, I'll get the name later. But that they would have liked to have landed a bit nearer, but they couldn't. And so they came, as I say, they tried in Big Bay. They knew it, but it was simply too strong. And so they then came round the corner here to what they call Losmets Bay. And even so, it was the wind was quite strong, and they they got a small ship, which they put into the surf on the wind side to try and give a little bit of lee water. And I think one or two boats nearly hit the rocks coming through. Now the picture shows it very clearly. You see there is this small, I think this is actually a slight exaggeration because the rocks don't go quite so far out, but they are there, very much. And so they had to keep clear of that. And so then the current is going up the coast, really up the coast. But there was quite a lot of wind and quite heavy weather. And when you see the boats, look, here's a boat on its side, very well drawn, thank you very much. and they were ordinary ship's boats, there were no landing craft. And then you had about 60 men, all with all their equipment, in amongst all the matelot who were rowing. So I think these are very, very accurate pictures. You see the boats when they're finished going back, very loaded, covered in red, all the scarlet jackets. And during that time, one boat of the 93rd Highlanders, my uncle's regiment, turned over in the surf, a little bit further up here, I think.
It's on the picture.
Are they?
On the right-hand side.
On the right-hand side.
You see it right in there.
Have you got it?
Yes, it's it.
There's one there, and that's got nothing in it. But this one turned over completely. No, don't worry, but we can have a look at it after. But certainly, and that was the only real casualty. And there were 36 of the 73rd which were drowned. And they only discovered, am I right, 3 bodies? I think they only found 3 bodies. Now, when you think of it, they had no time to go looking for bodies at that time. And they were terribly busy. And the current goes strongly up the coast. And I suspect they were all taken up the coast, but only 3 more. We've got all their names of these. But that was the only casualty at the landing, which is quite surprising. Because the picture actually is very good. You've got masses of boats coming in, heavily laden, and all the matelot coming up. These are English guys, you can see with their white trousers, and the Scots with their kilts. The English battalion, the brigade, was 24th Regiment. I'm trying to think of what it was. But the Highland Regiment, or in Scotland Regiment, always formed up in regimental order, whatever happened. Whether being inspected by generals or during a battle. The senior regiment on the first, the right, then the next one, and then the junior regiment. So you had the 71st, 72nd Seaforth, and then the 93rd, which were the Argyll and Southern Highland, the southern part of the was the battalion that my family came from. So there they were. Now this thing says on the next page, top of the page says, Janssens did not oppose the landing. Well, this is rubbish. Janssens did oppose the landing, but not terribly seriously. You can see he's got a lot of chaps here, because you know all right that there's a ridge, you can see it here, a sand ridge right along the coast. And in fact there were two of them usually. And so it was a wonderful opportunity. But what have you got to remember? What was going on? They were being fired at by masses of shells coming from the ship, who loved it. They loved having a chance of shooting at something real for a change. I served with the Navy for 4 years, being there on, and oh, it's terrific to have a go. But you could see it, and I mean they were putting it, and I gather they still every now and again find cannonballs in the sea and the cliff round about. So these chaps didn't stay long. And there was a bit of fighting going on, and in fact the Colonel Pack of the 93rd was actually wounded up here, slightly wounded, not bad, it was slightly. But there were a few casualties. But why didn't the Dutch bring up some guns and shoot at them? Well, because of these chaps. They couldn't compete. They had very little artillery, and you couldn't compete with that number of ships who were firing a hell of a lot of ammunition. So that there was, after a matter of a few hours, I think, the Dutch chaps withdrew. There was a skirmishing ashore, very little. And the light companies, each battalion had, I think it was 6 companies, and then you had one light company. Now 6 companies with the chaps were all lined up and all that. So the 6th was a light company, which was trained for working on their own and doing much more like modern times. And the light company of the 93rd was commanded by a Major Graham. This Major Graham we've heard about. And in fact, very soon after they'd landed, he was put in charge of the light companies of all the three battalions of the Highland Brigade. It gave him what became a light infantry company, which was great because they would do, and he was used to doing much more different things, not just standing in line and firing and that sort of thing. However, let's go on after that, because to land all the equipment and the rations and everything else for thousands of men in ordinary boats is a hell of a job. It's bad enough nowadays when you've got proper landing craft and maybe probably helicopters and everything as well. But you can imagine how. And so the next day they were still bringing troops ashore and a lot of equipment. What about horses? Tell me.
Difficult to land.
Well, the poor bloody horses would have had a difficult time getting in a ship, for one thing. This is one of the big problems. They, on the way from Europe, they went into South America to Brazil, they begins with an S. And they got, I think, about 50 horses or something like that. But that was meant for the cavalry, the hussars, or dragoons rather. So they obviously got it. Now, in the other drawing of the battle, there is one horse on the British side. If I knew anything, it would be the general's horse, because he had to get around.
The general's horse was loaded in Ireland, came all the way along.
Sorry?
The general's horse was loaded in Ireland.
Was it?
Came with him all the way.
Well, that's fine. He probably had his neighbour on the side of it too. I'm very glad that he used his authority, because that appears in the other photograph, but nothing else. Now, there's a query on this, because how many of you know Willem Steenkamp?
Yes.
Well, Willem has got a wonderful story. His family came from Swellendam, and his at this time, his family were part of the Swellendam Dragoons. And they came, and also the Stellenbosch Dragoons. They were, battle took place right underneath the hill here. What's the name of the hill? Blaauwberg, so, yeah. And Willem has a story, and they've got a halter, and they say that this horse belonged to a lieutenant of the British infantry who attacked him, and this was his horse, and this was they killed him and captured his horse, and this halter is in the museum in Swellendam. Now, I fail to believe that there were a lot of other colonels and majors with no horses, and a young lieutenant would not be allowed to have a bloody horse. That's a lovely story, but it's great, but you were realism, I'd be surprised. So, where do you go from there? Right. 7th of January, the remainder of the troops armaments came to shore. His force bestraddled the wagon trail. Jansen's moved his troops out of their camp at Reef Flay because he knew now where the British were committed to. So he came up to basically Blaauwberg. And I think they were surprised that the British didn't take Blaauwberg itself. But the British found it was going to be terribly difficult. They had no really good reason to take the hill. Jansen's moved his troop out of the camp to Reef Flay, and by afternoon had taken up position at Blaauwberg's Flay Farm. Now you know that's right on the other side. And that's now belongs to the is it still a building there or anything? Or just ruins?
Yeah, ruins. There's ruins and still a resident.
Yeah. But above all there is water there. That was one of the main things. He was on the east of Blaauwberg. His forces bestraddled the wagon trail to Cape Town, which the advancing British troops had to use. Now they talk about a wagon trail. If you look at the old maps, there are masses of tracks. It wasn't a road with like they were just tracks through the soft sand. British warships started bombardment of the camp at Reef Flay, not knowing that the Batavian troops had already moved. Because as soon as this big hill, big sand hill, was between that and the camp, and so they didn't get much result there. 8th of January, 3:50, 3 o'clock, 3 in the morning, the British force formed up in 2 brigades, made their way round the hill. From Blaauwberg, the Highland Brigade went round furthest to, well, we will see it when we get up there. In fact, you can then look at the map at the back, which is pretty accurate. John Mostard's farm, and then the Highland Brigade came up to, you can see on there Blaauwberg Flay, which is the farm which is still there, and now belongs to the society. And you can see the 3 Highland regiments, and then to their right, the 59th, the 53rd, and the 24th Regiment. It was the 24th Regiment, right over on the right, that attacked Blaauwberg, and where the horse of this young British lieutenant was killed, was taken. Now, going back to change the word, Jansen did not oppose the landing, but he did oppose the landing, but not in a big way. So that worked out. The remainder of the British troops on the 7 horses, necessarily, well, maybe the general's horse, but not horses. And because the dragoons had been sent up to Saldanha, because they were told when they got up to Saldanha, they must come back through the countryside and collect horses as they could, because they were very much needed. They had a few, but there was nothing like enough. Now, there's somebody else who needed horses. Who needed horses? Artillery. Yeah, a big one. I mean, trying to drag these pretty great guns, and particularly in sand. So what did they do? Anybody know? They made a plan. Sailors, 600 sailors. They had 6 guns, and they had 600 sailors who did magnificent work. 600 sailors pulling these guns. And you know, when you see these guns in these various fortifications, these would probably have had bigger wheels, not these little wheels on the land plane. But even so, to go through sand is one hell of a job. And they did bring him up. And they came up. It showed in the picture. No, it's not actually. I thought they did show. But they were in the centre, and they did open up at the Dutch. Now, what else can I say? The battle began on Blaauwberg, where the 24th Regiment drove the mounted citizens off the hill. Captain Forster was killed. I think he was a Lieutenant Forster. Was killed along with 15 men, either killed or wounded. His was certainly only 2 killed. By now the armies were within firing range of each other. Remember, the firing range was only 400 yards, 100 meters, very little. The Highland Brigade was ordered to fix bayonets and charge, supported by cannon fire. In fact, before that, they did a standard drill. You can't stop a stock Scottish soldier from doing what he's been taught all his life, is to form up, load, and then fire. And when these buggers were sitting there, all the lovely targets, they don't normally get human targets to shoot at, and they fired. But it was a bit too soon. It had quite an effect, but they should really have got about another 100 or 100 yards further. And then, what do?
Reload again.
Fix bayonets, charge. With the pipes playing, it's great. It's really And so they did. And so the Dutch element, you can see there, Norse, the Waldeck battalion was in the middle of it, and they were some of the first to break. And Jansen's been found. There's a wonderful picture of Jansen. In fact, that one up there is taken from the painting of Jansen with his sword, trying to get these guys to go back into the line. So it didn't take long. On the Batavia front, confusion reigned. The regiments began to break rank and retreat. You don't use the word retreat, so normally meant to be withdraw. A retreat is a withdrawal without order. And you don't use that word. It's a word not right. Ignoring Jansen's pleas to stand their ground, the British, already exhausted, did not pursue. Now, the British had come a long way. And remember, one of their shortages was water, because all the water had to be brought to shore for thousands of people, and they all had to be carried. In those days, they didn't have a lot of trucks coming along, or helicopter drops, and all the rest of it. The British did not pursue. The Batavia troops regrouped at Rietvlei. 347 soldiers were reported missing. These figures came from because the figure that on the Dutch side are a little bit difficult to get. The British troops were exhausted after their march across the hot sand of the scorching sun, middle of January, early January. When they arrived at the freshwater spring at Blaauwberg's Vlei farm, Baird had personally to supervise the distribution of water. Water was desperate. Now there's various descriptions of the battle and afterwards of the wounded and all that sort of thing. And it's not surprising that water is always a problem. I don't go anywhere. I've got a certain lady in my house who always complains that I put 2 bottles of water in, not just one. Baird had personally to supervise the distribution of water. In the meantime, of course, the Dutch were getting out of it. The farmhouse was converted into a temporary hospital. British casualties were 204 dead or injured. Now that 204 includes the 36 from the 33rd in the boat. Baird and the remainder of his troops pressed on and arrived at the deserted Rietvlei camp in the evening because the Dutch had moved out. Now, General Janssens was clever. Not only slim, but he was also clever, and he knew where he had a hell of a mixture of forces. And he knew that he couldn't resist for long. But what has he done? He's made plans to cover what he could. Anybody know what he did?
He was on his way to the Blaauwberg. He was on his way to the Blaauwberg to get for reinforcements.
Yes, he did, that's right. He went over what's now Solari's Pass, but it's the rough original pass. And he had built up a place in, I don't know if you know where the Elgin, the club is, up that road in the forests there. He had built up a small stock, and he knew he could get food and water from there. And he went, and he knew the British couldn't get over there easily, because the British were going to take quite a lot of time to get sorted out. They were intended to actually take Cape Town. So it was quite some time before they could go and look at Janssens himself. And they, however, the day after the battle, when the British started marching towards Cape Town, this wonderful chap from Koffler, anybody know from Koffler? He was a Dutch. He was a colonel. He wasn't. I don't know.
He was the commandant of the castle.
Was he commandant of the
Commandant
castle?
of the castle.
And the poor bugger, he had, you look at his life, he had surrendered 3 times in his career. Various Dutch, the Far East, and then here as well. And so he had to do it again. And he signed at the little cottage in Woodstock. Now, is it still there? It was very badly, just very close to the railway line. Now, there's a big tree beside it. I don't know if that's still there.
Later there's a street named Treaty Street.
Treaty Street. There is a
There's
Treaty
a tree, and there used to be a plaque in the old South Africa, brass plaque.
That's right.
Under the tree.
That's
the treaty.
exactly right. But that is where the treaty, the surrender was signed. And then the British marched in and took over the castle. And what did they do about the guns? To give the sailors due for all their work, they allowed them into the castle first, putting the guns into the castle, and then they stayed in the castle, which was a wonderful, wonderful effort. And in fact, there's another aspect too. In the regimental history of the 71st, Colonel Pack, their CEO, who'd been wounded here, on the day of the surrender, the following letter was sent to the Commander-in-Chief that's there by Brigadier General Ferguson, who was commanding the troops. As in the affair of Blaauwberg on the 8th instant, chance placed 2 of the enemy's guns in possession of the Highland Brigade. I hope you will be pleased. You see, whenever people captured guns, they were entitled to quite a bit of money for capturing them. I hope you will be pleased to order the allowance usually granted on such occasions be issued and shared amongst the 71st, 72nd and 93rd Regiments. Although the guns fell into our hands in front of the 71st Regiment, Lieutenant Colonel Pack, desirous that the 3 regiments should be considered as one family, has most handsomely withdrawn this prayer claim His Majesty's 71st Regiment might have, and to which the situation of the guns when taken would have entitled his most excellent court. So he basically wanted them to get the money to go between all the 3 Scottish regiments. Gosh, talk about Scotsmen. However, really that was the Britain got settled. Now there was a few other little bits going on. There was a small force at Hout Bay, and I think Musenberg. But a couple of small force from I think the 72nd Seaforce, under a lieutenant, was sent down to Hout Bay to clear that. And when they discovered how the chap was on his way, when they discovered that there was quite a bigger force than they thought, they sent somebody else, another platoon or two after him. But when he got there, they found him already captured or lost. So and then Simon's son was taken later on, but that went quite easily. Then, of course, came all the settling down. Now, what does it say after that? From Profilo, as I said, you had a doubtful history of having to hand over all sorts of things. The 10th, the provisional articles of capitulation signed at Profilo, we mentioned that, Jansen surrendered. And the 6th, Jansen's office and 573 men left in March. Now, this was exactly what Jansen wanted to do. Why he went up and sat over the mountain, he knew that the British couldn't get there easily, so that he'd have a bit of time to work things out. And he bargained about their future. And eventually, in fact, fairly quickly, the British, they knew they could do nothing else. They said, right, we will pay for all you people who want to go back to Hollywood, we will pay for their shipping to go back. And so they did. And it was quite a number. Jansen's, his officers, and 573 men left Table Bay in 7 ships, bound for the Batavian Republic, which was Holland. They were paid for by Britain. And that's it. Now the map, the map here is pretty good. It really is. It gives you a good idea. And it says, visit the military museum at the Castle of Good Hope, Cape Town. And I would suggest that, how many of you have been to the Castle Military Museum? A few of you, that's better, yeah. But I thought somebody, I got from it, was in my memories going for these things. So really, that's about all I can say at this stage. When we go up the hill, you can see that it's a wonderful view. It's the best view of Cape Town in my mind, except when it's pouring with rain. But it is wonderful because you can see Robben Island, and you've got a lot of, up there you've got a mixture of the original battle, you've got First World War, Second World War mainly. The Second World War I was interested in because my father was at the castle and my sister was in the radar. That a part of the war. And they, what was I going to say now? Something about the, but my father mentions in his diary, early days, visitor during the night, 5 miles north of Robben Island. It doesn't say what, but visitor means there was a submarine or something else like that. Twice he mentions this, not only there. Now at night, how did they see this? The radar on the hill. You see to begin with, the South African Navy took over all the defences of the Cape from Britain and paid for by Britain from about 1920. Now, as a result, all during the Depression, the coast artillery here had a 1-up or 10-up on the rest of the defence force because this was paid for by Britain. And so they kept their manpower. They had enormous lot of very, very good chaps in the coast artillery, paid for by Britain, and the guns and things were all being looked after. Now, in about 1936, they had many guns. I mean, up in down to, how many of you been to the new gun? Well, that's the old place there. There were 9.2 guns that were there from 1880. Now, those guns had a very short range, and the trouble was, because of the buildings going up, whenever they fired, they broke all the windows. So they wasn't very popular. So also they didn't have the range. Now, during the Second World War, well before the Second World War, the plan was to move those guns out to Robben Island, which gives them another 15 miles. And it means that they could cover the whole of Table Bay, which they started doing, but they had to build a harbour, they had to do everything. And Graham Moody, who was then a second lieutenant in the Cape Arthur South African Artillery, he remembers going to Robben Island with all the lunatics had gone, but the trees had grown up, and the only thing that was keeping it clear were rabbits. And he said, to get any view, you had to get down and look underneath the trees. However, look, eventually they got it, and they had to build a harbour, they had to do everything there. And they put in the barrel of these 9.2s alone, the barrel is 30 tons. And you can't move that easily. And the whole turret is about 120 tons. Massive. So, but they put them there, and there were 6-inch guns there as well. I've got a map here if you wanted to look at the Robben Island defences. But it was Cape Town important, and as I say, Graham Moody was there all the war, and he was not allowed up north because of the importance of the Cape. I think that's all for now.
May I add one thing that I think we haven't mentioned today, and that is that a lot of the Battle of Blaauwberg history was retrieved from the archives by David Craner, who was an archivist, who put it into his book on the Sutton Road, whatever it's called. And that is not, it's out of print, but it's still get atable in libraries and things. And all of the writings that he came across in the archive pertaining to this time are very neatly put into that book, as well as illustrations.
Which book is that?
It's Slag van Blaauwberg. Beslissen, maybe.
Beslissen, yeah, the Afrikaans book.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
But we say it's an Afrikaans book, but actually it's verbatim straight from the archive. So a lot of the English writing is still in English.
Right.
And it also has the charts, the sea charts, and some of the illustrations that are very useful to understanding what you've been speaking
I
about.
couldn't find my book when I was looking last night. Where are they still available?
No, they're out of print, but you can pick one up now.
Yes, at a hell of a price nowadays, yeah. But you're absolutely right. That book is there.
Oh, and there's the tiniest link here with just that, as I speak. We have David Craner's grandchild in the BCA. What are you? Grandchild? Uncle? Great uncle. There you go. You see what I mean? These 10 years little snippets of history.
Yes,
Keep coming back.
thanks very much.
Thank you. Craner is the education officer based here, so whenever you want to talk to him about please make acquaintance with him. Previous secretary of the Friends of Blaauwberg Conservation Area, Mrs. Stark, she's translated that book into English, and I think we need to put some effort into getting it published.
That's what I was going to ask you. I knew it was going to be done, but it hasn't been published yet.
And what we're going to do, just as a follow-up, we're going to interview Dan Slay, videotape him, and like today's presentation, we're also going to put that onto DVD or CD. We need to collect the stuff. Dan Slay has got, as Tony said, a slide sound presentation. Now, I worked for 3M in the 70s, and they were before television and videos, you know. For the youngsters, we would have a slide carousel on the top and a little audio tape that you put in the bottom, and it was synchronized with the slide. So we need to find one of those little boxes. Atkinson Sound used to hire them, I know, about 400 grand a day. But we need to get that converted. I've got a sound studio, a recording studio here in Tableview. We will edit it and put it onto DVD. And what I would like to do is to have Dan Slay come back here and do a follow-up presentation, and hopefully by that stage release the video so that people can see his slide. We've had it here before, But everyone, I couldn't remember who did this presentation, and Tony couldn't remember who had given this presentation, so I was chasing around, and eventually I got hold of Dan, and we hadn't here before, and we would like to see him here again. So let's, what we're going to do is I'm going to take this down.
This painting. I'm so glad to see the author and everybody here, Mark,
Yes.
because it's a wonderful painting. And I see that you've even got one boat in the middle with two horses going off it. Have you got any authority for that?
If you look at the engraving, the last picture, you'll see where Baird goes up to Captain Forster's body. You'll see 3 or 4 horses there at least.
Look, I thought that
I'll show that to you later.
Yeah.
It's in the book.
Yeah.
Okay,
So just a question, are
Yes.
prints available?
I'm not sure.
Yes, they're available right here.
Oh.
No,
Right
same
here.
size as that.
Oh, the books, yes, yes.
No, the print, no, the actual prints.
Footprints available right there. I've got about 5 or 6 here.
Okay, fantastic. As you know, Tony's got a mine full of information that he wants to share. So when we get up the hill, let him have his lunch first and then pick his brains. And there's lots of other people who've got interesting stories to tell. Just want to give a little bit of a punt for the Friends of Blaauwberg Conservation Area. We do have a membership form there. It's quite nominal, 50 Rand or 60 Rand for a family membership. There is a contribution towards our funds for day visitors, 20 Rand. And I'm going to invite Robbie to speak about the Cape Natural History Club and their contribution, which is why we have such a big number here today. So when we take a break, please give us your indication of logistics, whether you want to drive your own vehicles to the back of the hill, whether you want to take transport to the hill so we can share vehicles. And let's just say, I'm not sure what the time is now.
Start to live.
5 to 11. Okay, we were hoping to leave at about 11, but let's have half an hour, if that's enough time, and then we will take the journey to the hill. And thank you very, very much for coming through. And the Friends of Blaauwberg Conservation needs your memberships because we need numbers. There's various things I'm going to put on the top of the hill, the fantastic management plan that Jacques Kaler, who's at the back there videotaping, he's the manager here. You can get this on CD if you wouldn't want to really go through it, but there's a fantastic plan for this area. You know, it's just not just the history, it's the conservation of the plants and the animals in this area that we need to protect. This is the only area left for us to protect this kind of vegetation that we have. And we have started a group called Custodians of Rare and Endangered Wildflowers. From here, Tigerberg, Friends of Tigerberg have been very active and very much more advanced than us. So anyone who's interested in protecting or identifying our endangered wildflowers, please become members and come along and help capture the information that's here. That's it. I'm going to take a break now, and please have refreshments. There's coffee, there's cool drink, and drink a picnic on the top. Yes?